to go ahead and give an intro.
Lovely. Good morning, everybody. Or good whatever time you are, wherever you are. It's really nice to be here. So my name is Nicole Contaxis, and I work at NYU Langone Health in the NYU Health Sciences Library. What we run here is actually not a repository, so we kind of snuck in. We run what is called the NYU Data Catalog. What this is a listing of data sets that are either generated at NYU or have significant expertise at NYU about them. So when I say that, I mean something like the census or another one of those large external data sets where we might have researchers who do a lot of work on them. And we have descriptions for those as well as access instructions. Now, the reason why we've taken this approach here at NYU is in part because we do focus on data. And when we're working with medical data, as I'm sure everybody in this room knows, there's a lot of issues when it comes to access, when it comes to applying for access, making sure all those permissions are correct. So our goal was basically to make sure everybody knows what exists and give them as best of a picture of what that data looks like so that they can decide, do I go through with an IRB protocol on this? Do I go through with the application procedures for this de-identified but still sensitive data set? And so far, I would say that's worked fairly well for us. I will probably remind you all of that throughout this presentation because I think it's very important to remember that we're not storing the data. So that takes a lot of challenges off of our plate and sometimes introduces new challenges to us. The platform we use is actually an open source homegrown platform. You can see it on GitHub. We also have it available on OSF. That's the Open Science Foundation. And we do have this thing called the Data Discovery Collaboration. This is a group of people who are interested in things like metadata about data and facilitating data findability. And some of those folks actually use the platform we've built as the base of the platform that they use at their own institution. So, for example, Memorial Sloan Kettering and Anthony here have used our base, our code to build out something particular for them. I think they've made some significant changes, so I don't feel comfortable saying they use our code because they've done so much work on it to make it specific to their own institution and their own needs. Our repository came about because several researchers in our population health department really wanted help finding data sets. And we've really grown from there to do a lot of work on cataloging data sets coming out of NYU, as well as those other external data sets that I mentioned previously, like the census, that we also catalog. Our staffing is pretty robust. We have myself and another faculty member, Michelle Yee. We don't work full time on the NYU data catalog, but we do spend a lot of time thinking about how to integrate it in other systems and how to provide, proper support and data management support with the data catalog, and inclusion in the data catalog is the end goal. We also have two staff members who focus on outreach and curation. That's Umaya Ermi and Rebecca Kaplan. Rebecca focuses on the population health and clinical research communities, whereas Umaya works with our basic science communities. Now, our overall goal for our platform is just to make sure that people in our research community can find data to use and make their data findable to others. It's a very basic goal that ends up being very complicated. Over the years, our focus has really started to move towards interoperability with other systems at NYU Langone so that researchers have more of a seamless process through the data management life cycle. And I'll talk about that more, I think, a little bit with Pam's questions later on. Our day-to-day work across the team can differ pretty significantly. So as I mentioned, our two staff members do a lot more hands-on work with the catalog. They are calling up researchers, they are reading papers, they're doing a lot of very hands-on outreach. A lot of this outreach might be about the data catalog, but a lot of it includes things that end up being like information about data management more broadly, information about metadata more broadly. So we sort of use the data catalog as the first step into a researcher's door and a way to describe library services and data services that we provide more broadly. And Michelle and I, our day to day is much more variable, and it can really depend what's happening on the rest of the institution. I will speak for myself. I sit a lot on different IT committees. So we've become very involved in our data governance groups here at NYU. And a lot of this, again, is just trying to position the NYU data catalog as the end of a long data management pipeline that starts at the point of grant submission and then ends at um, data sharing. Um, and one last point is that we are an academic department here at our institution, and that has given us a fair amount of freedom to set our own evaluative stats. And I am very grateful also for a library leadership that has given us a fair amount of freedom to run pilot projects, to enter into collaborations. And I think that has very much informed our sort of focus on interoperability and our focus on collaborations with departments across the institution. So I think that should give you a pretty good idea of our group.
Thank you, Nicole. And I think that Dina may be joined by her colleague Maegan, but I'll let them go ahead and unmute and introduce themselves.
Good morning. I'm Maegan Halica. I'm a medical librarian for the MaineHealth Institute of Hospitals here in Maine, one in New Hampshire. Dina's not feeling all of that. She has a sore throat and no voice, so I'll be kind of speaking on behalf of MaineHealth along with Dina. I don't know if she's on here. Jump in, Dina, and just say hi if you are, but I'm happy to present. To start the presentation, the name of our repository is the MaineHealth Knowledge Connection. This handles publications across the institution. We have 23,000 roughly people that work for MaineHealth. This holds their scholarly works through the Digital Commons Network. And for the institutional repository, this started before my time. I handle the work of the repository, but Dina had originally started this, I think, back in 2017-ish officially. Sorry, Dina, if that's wrong. But this originally came from an EndNote project that she had with Digital Commons. And it started with an internal funding opportunity for medical humanities, and she had done a pilot knowing that this would benefit the entire institution. So that quickly partnered up with upcoming initiatives, and the institution decided to kind of roll this out as something the library could handle for future works. So the goal for the repository has changed over time. It had originally started here at Maine Medical Center, which is our largest hospital in the MaineHealth kind of umbrella of, I believe, 11 locations, 10 or 11. And now the publications and scholarly works in our repository, they have expanded as MaineHealth has kind of become one institution rather than our separate entities across the state. In addition to the transition, we also hold our Journal of Maine Medical Center on our institutional repository. And then we have also added along the way since the beginning, content like grand rounds, presentations from those in the medical student program here in Tufts University. We hold different poster presentations from different parts of the institution, such as nursing, our research institute. Those collections have really created a larger, robust collection. Hi, Dina, I see you. So, Dina, if there's anything you want to add as I go along, just go ahead and feel free to interrupt.
Are we doing our introductions?
Yes, I hadn't seen you. So if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Oh, sure, of course.
Yes, that would be great.
I'll just add that have you talked a little bit about how we got started? I can add that. So this actually started gosh, about 15 years ago as an EndNote library, which we then advocated for a product that was a little more robust than that. And that happened in partnership with some of our initiatives at the organization for Lean Six Sigma and quality improvement. So that is really how we kind of got some traction with the repository. Um, and as we've come along, we've expanded to our health system. So now we cover all 10 hospitals of the health system. And we've included a journal as well. So we now are publishing the Journal of Maine Medical Center. So that has been a way that we've expanded since then.
Want me to continue, Dina? I can kind of follow up with the what this looks like on my end. The background and day-to-day work that covers a lot of the background. I do handle the institutional repository with the scholarly works in my day-to-day position. So what that looks like for a medical librarian in hospital, those pull, I primarily use PubMed, and articles are from our institution are filtered to me. And as I go along through, reviewing the publications on that end that come through, I add them to our repository and kind of make sure that it's linked to the appropriate discipline, department, different location. So that's part of the published works and journals. And then I do communicate with other departments, such as the nursing residency program. They often do a lot of poster presentations, which can be found in the Knowledge Connection and are sent my way. We've worked with a few groups in the Research Institute with presentations and posters and handouts that are held there. And we've been able to definitely use it as a publishing platform in recent years, with a lot of different kinds of work coming our way. So every day it varies. It's nice. I get to hear from a lot of people from across MaineHealth.
Thank you, Maegan and Dina.
Yeah.
Colin.
Hey, it's still morning. Good morning, everyone. I just want to shout out to Stephen and the MIRL Planning Committee for this. I really appreciate being here, and for Pam for bringing us together, and to Dina, Nicole, and Megan for presenting here. It's a real privilege and honor. I love MIRL, and congratulations on your 5 years. Looking forward to hearing from you folks in the questions and answers. So I'm here from the Harvard Library, and more specifically from a division called Open Scholarship and Research Data Services, which is a marriage of the open scholarly communications teams and the data management and consultation teams. We do run DASH, which is Harvard's Institutional Repository, which is an acronym for Digital Access to Scholarship at Harvard. So it runs on DSpace. We originally started it back in 2009. And it was in support of Harvard's kind of, at that time, pioneering institutional open access policies. The first one passed with the Faculty of Arts and Sciences in 2008. And once that passed, people were like, what do we do with our stuff? You told us we have to make it available. So the repository came online using DSpace 1.1, and then it moved to 1.8. So for those of you that know the history of and saga of DSpace, you will be able to relate to this, that we actually continued on with the version 1 for a long time. Happy to talk a little bit more about that. And so our office has a repository division, which I lead, and we have one other full-time operational support person. But again, we have a number of folks in our office who talk about policies, open access policies, data management. And so we also deal with ETDs, ORCID, everything kind of life cycle, scholarly life cycle at towards the end of that point. We are kind of situated within the Harvard Library. We were originally a provostial function. Because we supported policies, and so that has changed. We now are obviously more embedded in the library. We are now actually within kind of the collection strategy division, which is really nice because those folks really understand not only services but collections. And so I think what gets lost sometimes, and maybe many of you can relate, that, we forget sometimes that our repositories or data repositories they're actually collections. And so we don't have to actually like kind of convince people that we actually manage a collection there. Again, we were launched to sponsor or to basically support green deposits, but over time we still support green deposits. It's still a primary mission of ours for the repository, but we've expanded now, and Dash hosts all sorts of genres of scholarship. We're more aggressive in collecting and distributing ETDs. We have a new journal hosting program that will leverage DAS. Happy to answer questions about that. So really, we've kind of expanded the scope of Dash, and our day-to-day really is we do a lot of strategy, vendor relations. We're a hosted solution, so we have to manage that relationship. Do a lot of outreach, mostly on campus, although we do some external outreach as well, and then of course just operational work, which I think we can all kind of commiserate about, just the volume and scale of what comes into our repositories that need care and handling, watering and feeding. And so one thing that just to finish off here, one of the prompts was really about where our team fits in and what's novel and unique. I believe that we're in a central place within our library. So we're not necessarily like a medical repository, although our largest collection is from our Harvard Medical School. So we like to my analogy is always we're the franchisor of a franchised model. So the idea is that we have a central service that supports a number of different locations around Harvard. And our level of support varies depending on what their resources are. So I think this is like really a cool and unique place to position the repository. It's like we can either be full service, kind of corporatize what needs to happen in certain schools or programs, but then also like we're positioned to basically just here's the tool and support your training and outreach to bring material in. So looks like Pam put a link to our repository. So thank you very much for doing that. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Those are really great introductions. And we have, of course, a lot of questions on our list, and there's no way we're going to get to all of them. But I thought we could go to one question that is one of my favorite questions, and I just put it in the chat for everyone. But could you tell us about a change in the IR that you just had to roll with? And anyone who wants to take a stab at that question. And I know you all can have different answers too, so we can kind of take turns as well.
I mean, I could bite and continue to hear my voice. I also share your fondness for this question, Pam, because a lot of my colleagues and peers, and many of you are here. We like to talk about IR horror stories. This could be a session at any number of conferences, and people could fill an entire period with this. But one thing, it'd be interesting to hear from all of you too. I think one of the things that we've often had to roll with are migrations. I believe, I'm assuming many of you have gone through this. They can be very painful. It's like kind of building a house. Like you set out a plan and then you always go over budget over time. The one thing we had to roll with our recent migration, which was from a version we did in 2018, we just rolled that out this year through our third essentially migration. But the roll with it piece was, and a cautionary tale, if you will, was we configured our repository in 2018 to have a very highly customized workflow. And at the time, this felt just incredibly pioneering. We were very proud of it. I'm really happy with the work that everyone associated did with it. And it fit this like really awesome bespoke kind of landscape here at the library where we distributed repository work. And then the COVID hit. And so then what happened was that workflow had to be radically adjusted. And then the repository didn't really fit that need or that workflow anymore. And so then bringing people into this repository space, whether they're users or submitters or administrators, meant that we had to do all this heavy lifting about like, okay, this is how it was, and this is what we're stuck with, and this is what we have. So my kind of takeaway on all of that, and to like maybe hear from others, is keep it simple, and that was the takeaway for us that we learned from that particular instance.
I'll jump in here. So we had an opportunity about a year and a half ago, uh, and that was that our research institute needed help with the public access policy compliance. And so we rolled with that in that we use that you know that as part of our skill set, Maegan's skill set. When I when I say our, I'm usually meaning Maegan, um, and and have created a great relationship with research based on that. Um, and that continues to grow. So that's been great. So, while they turned to us, asking for something that wasn't part of our current workflow, yeah, and needed resources from us, it allowed us to partner with them, which now in turn, we are receiving resources from them, and it's been a good partnership. So that's one way we've kind of rolled with circumstances here. Now to build on what Colin was saying. We absolutely had the same situation. We used Digital Commons, and we had the expert gallery. And Maegan could speak much more to that. What happened with the expert gallery and the alternative they offered. Do you want to talk a little bit about that from this past year?
Certainly. So we did have the expert gallery attached to our repository, which, in a nutshell, it was a great idea. I could see a lot of benefits. And we had created, I think, close to 150 profiles with the expert gallery, and then kind of handed them gracefully off to the authors of the Institute that had retired, and then the Pure platform had kind of replaced this. And I think the biggest part of what I found to be challenging was that the other, again, the passing off to the authors in our institute. These are big researchers, doctors, and in order to kind of make it a robust profile, it really needs to stay updated. And they don't have, I would love to have all of the time in the world to do that for them. But it just wasn't, it wasn't out there for them enough. But we did talk to our person that handles our online provider directory, and we have started to kind of plan out with them how we can kind of combine the two, so that when someone's looking for a provider, not only it will give them their medical background, but also a great list of their research and works they've done in the past. So we're working on that. Is that
Yeah,
kind of, yeah.
I think what we learned from that too was that the Pure platform was too much for us. It was not what we wanted. And so, it wasn't the right fit for us. And we had to let go of the expert gallery, like managing that ourselves, and something like that. And so this partnership with our communications team that does our provider directory is kind of an opportunity. But yeah, absolutely rolling with it.
Yeah. Um, and I'm gonna just pick on a few themes that I feel like I heard, but please correct me if I misheard you as you were going through, which is that frequently when you're rolling with it, we'll say, it's like you're working with departments that might not understand the complexity of the idea they're putting forward, the complexity of the problem they're asking you to solve. And I found that in my own work as well. Focusing specifically on data, we had a charge from leadership at our institution to try to think about how we can encourage sharing of pre-publication genomic data. And I think a lot of our leadership was like, oh, this should be pretty easy, right? People are generating it, it's pre-publication, we'll start collaborations earlier, it'll work out great. But I think for a lot of us, we understand that, it's not always that simple, it's not always that easy. And so rolling with it, in my perspective, is always this funny little balance between allowing somebody to push you and try something that you think is hard and being like, you know what, maybe this is worth pursuing, even if I understand the complexity that somebody else doesn't. And then also figuring out ways to describe complexity when maybe you only have 10 minutes. And also, this person isn't necessarily going to want to go into the real nitty gritty of the background. Um, so, yeah, when I hear rolling with it, I just think about this balance between letting somebody push me forward and trying something more difficult and really explaining sort of the depth of my expertise and my team's expertise and what it means to try to put through a project like this.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice way of summarizing it, Nicole. And I'm going to ask a question that I think is maybe the other side of rolling with it. And I have time, I know, for one more question, and then we'll open it up to questions from everyone in attendance. But what is like you can also make plans sometimes. And then sometimes the plans may end up rolling with it, but at least start with a plan. So what is one specific future plan or hope that you have for the IR at your institution or for IRs in general? And how do my collaborations or pilots come into that? Dare
Um,
to
um,
plan.
I always, and I'll jump in again. Just as to say, like, I always think about my plans as having a series of plans and waiting for one of the windows to open so I could jump through it, as opposed to constructing a door. I don't know if that metaphor works. Um, but what I continue to hope for our particular implementation, which again is a little unique, is really figuring out ways to integrate ourselves throughout the institution. So people aren't saying at the end of their work, oh, there's that cute little project at the library. Let's make sure we do that because it's good to do open science and it's good to be collaborative, but instead for it to be the assumed end of your project, and to build out the infrastructure in a way that just it's like a nice little road that ends at the data catalog. That's my dream. Making that happen feels pretty intense because there's a lot of processes that would have to go into that. So when I think about collaborations or pilots, it's trying to find the people who can help us work towards that, that sort of have what I would call the juice to require things from researchers so we can start moving towards it. So right now, we are working with this board called the Data Sharing Strategy Board, which basically makes decisions on what data we can share out of our institution and what we can't. This is particularly important now as we enter into a world where AI is being used, and we want to be really careful about sort of, especially what sort of patient data is getting out there with these new technologies, right? So I've been working with them to start to figure out ways for us to look at data management and sharing plans and work with researchers so that we can approve data sharing at the start of a grant. And in my goal of goals is that we take that approval and then my team reaches out to them 3 years later and says, hey, you were approved to share this data. Did you share it? Is it in the catalog? Can we help you do that? What do you need from us? And so that's sort of more towards what I'm hoping to see, especially in our particular implementation, where we're not just the publication arm that people come to, but rather the publication arm that goes to people and people already know about.
Yeah, and building on a little bit of that, I think the theme, what I was going to mention, kind of builds on Nicole and a general theme. So we're switching it, like you kind of thematically summarized our previous question. I hope I can do that here. I mean, in a practical sense for us, we've kind of tried to do as much road mapping as we can, and we try to make that road mapping, as public and as we want people to see their work in it, not only like librarians and our colleagues, but also the folks that, leverage or use the repositories. And I think like if I look at the roadmap altogether and then hearing Nicole is like this idea that like our main kind of future plan or hope is this kind of and it's actually like a challenge too. I think, it's this idea of the trustworthy and relevance of our repository and this idea of like, do are we signaling to folks that the repository is a place that they can go for research outputs when they're done with this particular research life cycle? There's a lot of talk right now about the kind of trustworthiness of higher ed or for science, and so it's like how do we position the repository as part of that, and also this idea of relevance too, in the sense of like there's a lot of competing places for these things. There's both for-profit and nonprofit, open source, closed source. And so it's like, where do we put this? Where does the federal government involved? And so, I think for us, it's the future plan is this kind of vibe around trying to make the repository more engaged in kind of this larger research effort, and not just this like this repository and you make it open access. That's the altruistic goal, right? But it's also just like, is this the right place? Like, and that's part of our big scope plan.
Oh, well, when you said what is one plan, it's hard to say what the one plan is, but I guess if I had to say one, it would just be partnering and partnering in a couple of ways. So one way of partnering is with our vendor, which, um, I think advocating for the features that we want, the kind of access controls that we're looking for. We've done some of that in terms of the AI bot scraping issues that have occurred, but continuing to do that, expecting more from them. Or looking elsewhere for, alternatives. In the hospital setting, we don't have the open source option. It's just not something that is okay for us to explore. So, because of that, we really have to work with the vendors. But for instance, we use Ovid Synthesis. I'm not sure if Megan mentioned that before I hopped on, but we use Ovid Synthesis for um, quality improvement project management, and that's really expanding. And an example of that is, it maps out, provides templates for projects, um, as a guide, as an educational tool. Um, why not add a publishing platform to that and just call it call it good, and have everything there, advocating for features like that and kind of the tangential products that you have, how can those work, and using it as part of that, uh, um, sort of overarching, educational tool. I see it very much as an educational tool at our organization as well as like a showcase. Um, I would say also, on the research end, we, like I said, I've partnered with them quite a bit. We have our intellectual property and innovations team, and they use First Ignite, which is a product that is looking for funding opportunities based on your current activity, research activity. I'd love to own a piece of that and really kind of be the return on the work that's already being done to look for funding opportunities that can continue to feed those projects at the organization. So those are the kind of partnerships, just throughout the organization, both internally and also with vendors.
Thank you all. Those were great answers, and they've inspired some questions already that have come into the chat. And we'll now kind of just open it up to questions from everyone in attendance. And I know that one of the questions in chat was already answered about the PubMed alerts, but another question was, do you all include publications from a researcher before or after they come to your institution, or try to just contain institutional work? So any thoughts on that one?
I can speak to that because we run into that quite a bit. So we've kind of made it, we stick to, if they are here at MaineHealth, it goes into our repository. It does not count works before MaineHealth or after. We used to add those to the expert gallery, of course, as more of a bibliography of their complete works. But what's nice, a couple of things. What's nice about Digital Commons Network, there's a lot of other institutions that use this. And I have found in the past that when you search by the author in the entire network, those will all come up. But other than that, we stick to current works or while they're here. And we also have histories too, like photographs, and we archive, a few pieces of old newsletters. That's a whole nother thing. But I think that answered your question.
I'll just add quickly on our end. Again, we're not taking publications. We're really focused on data, but we will occasionally include records for data sets that were generated before a researcher got here. If they come here and then we've had a few that come with these very large, very robust data sets. But those generally exist as the exemption because we are concerned about things like long-term ownership and access policies. And if it's held at another institution and they have their own access policies, it can get quite complicated. So we make exceptions when it is just too good to let go, basically.
Yeah, that's good to hear. Interesting to hear these kind of collecting scopes and policies. Ours is just again a little different. It always depends, right? So as long as you're at our institution, you can deposit any work that you have, even if it was done at a prior place. So the idea is that our only gate is if you're currently a full-time person at our institution. So if you are, then obviously the works you produce under the moniker of our institution is qualifies for inclusion in the repository, but you can also back load your catalog from before. The only difference is that it isn't covered under a suite of open access policies that we put forth. So it might mean that we're less able to deposit those works, under more open licenses. So that's one thing we work with a lot of folks with, is this myriad of different policies that allow the repository to a greater or lesser degree distribute your works, but we do retrospective loading. We have a service that helps that as well. I see Jerry also. I'll just take the liberty of bridging that to go to the next question. I hope that's okay. And Jerry asked why Harvard moved from digital commons to DSpace. So I may have misspoke or was unclear. We've been a DSpace shop from day one. So we've always been on DSpace, and we are completely and fully dedicated to DSpace as our repository solution. So I love DSpace. That's a personal thing. So I'm always happy to talk to any of you about our experiences with using it or what DSpace can offer you, if that's of interest.
We definitely still have time for more questions, but I'll ask one follow-up question of Nicole. I mean, with a data catalog, you drastically simplify your life by having it be just that, a catalog and not actually storing the data. But could you talk about the challenges of being a catalog? Like, I know you
Yes.
mentioned that in your intro.
And we do, on one hand, I'm grateful that we don't have to deal with questions of storage because I understand that to be so complicated. But what that does mean is we have to think about the storage other people are controlling and how we interact with that. So for us, sometimes a researcher has put a data set on an external repository. It's an NIH suggested or supported one, and it's nice and easy. We describe it, we link out to that repository. We're increasingly getting situations where storage is complicated. So we work with a group here that works mostly with microscopy data. And so this is image data. They have their own data management system, which can store it. It also stores their annotations of this microscopy image data. And we have to work with them to figure out how do we catalog the data that they store on their specific system and how do we include it on ours? And so then you end up in very annoying but important questions like what is a data set? What does this other group consider a data set? And what does our researcher consider a data set? Because, it's not a one-to-one when you're talking about cataloging a data set that is held in a different data management system. So especially as we start looking at much more complex data types, so things like this image data, 3D imaging data, all of that, we end up having to go back to these basic questions over and over, which is what is your data set? What are the boundaries around it? I enjoy those questions. I've got a philosophy background. I'm not sure everybody would.
Yeah,
Nicole,
thank you.
can I ask, so including qualitative data?
So, qualitative data is a source of agitation for me. mostly because of the de-identification process. So we will include it, and that is fine to include. I have not had a qualitative data set come across my desk that I haven't looked at this and said, we need to get this confirmed that this is truly de-identified. Particularly because a lot of the people doing that qualitative data research are in our population health department. They're working with vulnerable populations. And I also think, politically right now, we have to be very careful about not just identifiable information getting out, but sensitive information that might describe health behaviors that some people don't like. So we would include qualitative data. I am very nervous. Qualitative data makes me more nervous than so many other types of data.
Yeah. Still have a few minutes left, and I do see Amy's comment in the chat that Amy would like to know if there are hospital health systems using hosted open source systems, and of course, if there's a more cost-effective option than say digital comments.
I'm not sure if this will completely answer your question, but I think, Dina, correct me if I'm wrong. Part of being a medical institution in hospitals, we have to be really careful about what we allow for open access. And I find that the workflow, Dina, is this kind of answering the question? Linking to PubMed prevents any hiccups with the paywalls. Is that where you're going with that?
I think with the open source software like DSpace is the open
Okay,
source
gotcha,
software for repositories, and we looked at that actually originally, and it
gotcha.
was a no-go with our IT department. However, they do have hosted versions now that I would like to revisit because those, would allow us to, have that support. In academic institutions, sometimes you can, get some really bright graduate students to, build stuff for you too, and they're there to support it and, and pass it on. Um, and our IIT, it's just this is never going to be a priority for them to support. So we have to be kind of mindful of having products that we can turn to, the support that the product provides. So I know that there are hosted DSpace platforms. I'd be curious to know about those if anyone's using them.
Thanks, Dina. Apologies for the misunderstanding. And I'd also like to know about DSpace.
Okay, we have time for if anyone has any thoughts on DSpace or one more question to wrap us up too.
I just have a little bit of something I'd like to say that we hadn't mentioned with the question of what groups at your institution are using data. Recently, with the Research Institute we have at MaineHealth, there are several centers, and I was asked by someone from the Research Institute wanting data on the publications based off of, I think, I guess it boiled down to I think each researcher has to publish a certain amount of works, and they just wanted that data in a spreadsheet of who wrote what. And not only was I was able to produce some of those numbers with the repository, but it allowed me to cross-reference what else I found in other places. So that was beneficial for me too.
Okay. Well, I want to thank all of our panelists for taking time to be here with us today and for a great panel and for everyone for attending.